Jessamine Porter clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down the dusty main street of Superior, Arizona. Her gaze fixed on the ground, painfully aware of the whispers that followed her like persistent flies. At barely 19, she carried not only the weight of her unborn child, but also the crushing burden of shame in a town where unmarried mothers were treated worse than the lowest criminals. The year was 1885, and Superior was a bustling mining settlement nestled in the shadow of Apache Leap Mountain. The town had sprouted almost overnight when silver had been discovered in the nearby hills, drawing prospectors, merchants, and all manner of folk seeking fortune. Jessamine had arrived only a year prior, accompanying her father who'd been hired as an accountant for the Silver King Mining Company. Now her father was dead, buried in the small cemetery on the edge of town, and she was alone with her secret growing more obvious by the day. "Look at her," a woman's voice carried on the dry desert breeze. "Porter girl's gotten herself in trouble, disgraceful." Jessamine quickened her pace, the small bag of groceries clutched in her trembling hands. 4 months along now, she could no longer hide her condition with loose dresses and carefully positioned shawls. Soon, she would be unable to venture into town at all without facing the full brunt of public scorn. "Miss Porter," the voice of Mrs. Wallace, the general store owner's wife, cut through the air like a whip. "I believe your account has reached its limit. We won't be extending any further credit to women in your condition." Jessamine felt her cheeks burn. "But I've always paid my debts, Mrs. Wallace." Your father isn't here anymore, is he?" Mrs. Wallace sniffed, her pinched face contorting with disdain. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before you decided to disgrace yourself." Tears stung Jessamine's eyes as she turned away, nearly colliding with Reverend Simmons, whose perpetually dour expression darkened further at the sight of her. "Miss Porter," he intoned solemnly, "perhaps it's time you considered finding accommodations elsewhere. Your situation is causing quite a stir among our more respectable townsfolk." Jessamine mumbled an apology and tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. "The wages of sin are steep, young lady," he continued. I suggest you step aside and let the lady pass, Reverend." The deep voice came from behind Jessamine, its tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. She turned to find herself looking up at a tall man she'd never seen before. He wore the dust of the trail, his clothes practical and well-worn. The stranger's eyes were the clear blue of a mountain lake, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. The Reverend bristled. "This is a private conversation, sir." "Doesn't look private to me," the stranger replied, glancing pointedly at the gathering crowd of onlookers. "Looks like a public spectacle at the lady's expense." "You know what she is," Mrs. Wallace hissed. The stranger's expression didn't change. "I see a young woman being harassed in broad daylight. That's all I need to know." He turned to Jessamine, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that nearly broke her composure. "Madam, I'd be honored to escort you home." Before Jessamine could respond, Mrs. Wallace made a sound of disgust. "You'll ruin your reputation consorting with her kind." The stranger replaced his hat and offered Jessamine his arm. "Madam, if you do me the kindness of walking beside me, I'd consider it a privilege." Jessamine hesitated, confused by this unexpected defense. "Hold your head up," he added quietly, for her ears alone. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." Something in his words, perhaps the simple human kindness that had been so absent from her life these past months, gave Jessamine courage. She raised her chin and slipped her hand into the crook of his offered arm. "Thank you, Mr. Keller." "Knox Keller," he replied with a slight nod. Jessamine Porter, she responded, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Together they walked past the gawking townspeople. And for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Jessamine didn't hunch her shoulders or try to hide her growing belly. The stranger Knox matched his long stride to her shorter one, his presence beside her like a shield against the stares and whispers. "Which way?" he asked when they reached the crossroads. "The small house at the end of Maple Street," she said, pointing to a modest dwelling set apart from its neighbors. They walked in companionable silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the packed dirt road. When they reached the small white picket gate that enclosed her yard, Jessamine reluctantly withdrew her hand from his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Keller. Not many would have done what you did." Knox shrugged. Not much of a man who'd stand by while a lady's being mistreated. "Still, you didn't have to involve yourself in my difficulties. Mind if I ask what brings a fine lady like yourself to such difficult circumstances?" His question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity and perhaps concern. Jessamine hesitated. She'd grown accustomed to keeping her story to herself, but something about Knox Keller's forthright manner made her want to trust him. "My father died 3 months ago. Pneumonia," she began. "We had been living here for nearly a year while he worked for the mining company. Before he passed, I became engaged to William Barrett, the mine superintendent's son." "And the father of your child," Knox deduced quietly. Jessamine nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her belly. "When I told him about the baby, he denied it was his, called me terrible names. Then he simply left town." She gave a bitter laugh. "His father told everyone William had urgent business in San Francisco." Knox's jaw tightened. "The coward. I've been living off what little my father left, but it's nearly gone. And as you saw, my welcome in Superior is wearing thin." She tried to smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "But I've troubled you enough with my problems. Thank you again for your kindness." Knox studied her for a long moment. "I'm looking for work myself. Just arrived in town, thought I might try the mines." "They're always hiring," Jessamine confirmed, "though it's dangerous work. I've faced worse." Something in his tone suggested he wasn't exaggerating. "I'd like to call on you tomorrow, Miss Porter, if that's acceptable. Perhaps I could help with any repairs your house might need." Jessamine blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but you don't have to. I'd like to," he interrupted gently. "No strings attached, no expectations. Just one neighbor helping another." Jessamine felt a warmth spread through her chest, something she hadn't experienced since her father's death, the simple comfort of not being completely alone. "Then I'd be grateful for the company, Mr. Keller." He tipped his hat and stepped back. "Until tomorrow, Miss Porter." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and for the first time in months, Jessamine felt a small flicker of hope. True to his word, Knox appeared at her gate the following morning. He'd clearly found lodgings and cleaned up from his travels, his dark hair still damp from washing, his clothes brushed free of dust. In one hand he carried a small toolbox. "Morning, Miss Porter," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all, Mr. Keller." She stepped aside to let him enter. "Would you care for some coffee?" "That would be mighty welcome." In her small kitchen, Jessamine busied herself with the coffee pot while Knox looked around discreetly. The house was modest but neat, though signs of needed repairs were evident. A loose floorboard here, a cracked window pane there, a door that didn't quite sit right in its frame. "Your father built this place?" he asked, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "No, we rented it when we arrived. The owner lives in Phoenix and has little interest in maintenance." She sat across from him at the small table. Mr. Keller, I must ask, why are you being so kind to a stranger, especially one in my situation? Knox cradled his cup in calloused hands. My sister found herself in similar circumstances some years back, he said quietly. Town she was in treated her just as poorly. I was away working cattle drives in Texas by the time her letter reached me. He paused, his blue eyes clouding with an old grief. By the time I got there, she was gone. Influenza, they said, but I think it was more the cruelty that wore her down until she had no fight left. I'm so sorry, Jessamine whispered. So am I. I should have been there for her. He took a sip of coffee, composing himself. When I saw you yesterday, something in me couldn't walk away, not this time. Jessamine reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. Your sister would be proud of the man you are. Knox cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with emotional terrain. Now, about those repairs. That front step is about to give way entirely. I'll start there, if that's agreeable. For the next several hours, Jessamine watched in admiration as Knox set about fixing the most pressing issues around her home. He worked efficiently, with the quiet competence of a man accustomed to solving practical problems. By mid-afternoon, the wobbly steps were solid, the loose floorboards secured, and he was replacing the cracked window pane with glass he'd purchased that morning. You mentioned cattle drives, Jessamine said as she brought him a glass of water. Are you a cowboy then? Knox smiled slightly. Was. Spent 10 years riding with outfits from Texas to Montana. Good life in its way, but lonely. What brings you to Arizona? Change of scenery. Thought I might try my hand at mining for a spell, save up some money. He wiped his brow with his sleeve. Eventually, I'd like a small ranch of my own. Nothing fancy, just enough land to run some cattle, maybe grow a little hay. A worthy ambition, Jessamine said sincerely. And you, Miss Porter, what were your ambitions before? He gestured vaguely toward her midsection. Jessamine considered the question. I was to be married, she said simply. I thought William and I would have a life together. He spoke of moving to San Francisco eventually. She shrugged. I hadn't thought much beyond being a wife and mother. And now I must be practical. I need to find a way to support myself and my child. She sighed. I've been taking in mending and laundry, but it's barely enough, and once the baby comes. Knox nodded thoughtfully. Seems to me Superior might not be the best place for a fresh start. Perhaps not. But where would I go? How would I get there? She gestured around the small house. This is all I have left. Sometimes all a person needs is a helping hand to get started somewhere new, Knox said, hammering the final nail into the window frame. There. As the days passed, Knox became a regular visitor to Jessamine's small home. True to his word, he'd found work at the Silver King mine, joining the crews that descended into the earth each morning in search of the precious ore that had built Superior. The work was grueling and dangerous, but Knox never complained, and each evening after his shift, he would stop by to check on Jessamine, often bringing small gifts, fresh eggs from a farmer outside town, a length of bright ribbon he thought might cheer her, once even a second-hand rocking chair he'd purchased and refurbished for her. Despite the gossip their friendship generated, Knox remained steadfast in his support. He escorted Jessamine to the general store when she needed supplies, his imposing presence deterring the worst of the town's open hostility. Even Mrs. Wallace held her tongue when Knox was present, though her disapproving glares spoke volumes. One evening in late September, as they sat on Jessamine's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Knox broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. Winter will be here before long, he observed. How are you fixed for firewood? Jessamine glanced at the meager woodpile beside the house. I've been trying to ration what I have, but She rubbed her growing belly absently. Now 6 months along, there was no hiding her condition. "I'll manage somehow," Knox frowned. "You shouldn't have to just manage, not in your condition." He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I've been thinking, Miss Porter Jessamine, if I may, this situation isn't sustainable." Her heart sank. Was he finally growing tired of the burden she represented, of the whispers that now followed him as well? She couldn't blame him if so. "I understand if you feel you must distance yourself." "What? No." Knox looked genuinely surprised. "That's not what I meant at all." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I meant that you deserve better than scraping by in a town that treats you like this. You deserve a real chance." Relief flooded through her. "What are you suggesting?" "I have a friend, Jim Hollister. We rode together for several years. He's got a small ranch outside Prescott. Good man, solid. He wrote me recently that he's looking for help with the books and correspondence his business is growing. Said the position would include room and board for the right person." Jessamine's eyes widened. "And you think I might be that person?" Knox nodded. "You mentioned your father was an accountant. I reckon you picked up some of his skills." "Yes, he taught me bookkeeping. I helped with his work sometimes." Hope began to stir within her. "But would your friend be willing to hire someone in my circumstance? Jim's not one to judge. His sister raised 3 children on her own after her husband was killed in a mining accident. Jim helped her through it." Knox's expression was earnest. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think it would work out." Jessamine sat back in her chair, considering the possibility. A fresh start, away from the judging eyes of superior. Work that would provide for her child. It seemed almost too good to be true. "Prescott is a fair distance," she said slowly. "The journey wouldn't be easy, especially for me now." "I'd escort you," Knox said immediately. "Make sure you arrived safely." "You would do that?" She searched his face. "Why, Mr. Keller, why go to such lengths for me?" Knox was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "Because in the short time I've known you, Jessamine Porter, I've come to admire your courage and dignity. Because you deserve kindness and respect, not scorn. And because—" he met her eyes directly, "because I find myself caring for your welfare more than I expected to." Jessamine felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it, that's all I ask for now." She nodded slowly. "I will. Thank you, Knox." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered features and made him look younger, less careworn. "Good. That's good." As he rose to leave, Jessamine impulsively caught his hand. "You've been a true friend when I needed one most. Whatever happens, I won't forget your kindness." Knox squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." That night, as Jessamine lay in bed, her hands resting on her rounded belly where her child occasionally kicked and shifted, she allowed herself to imagine a future different from the bleak prospects she'd resigned herself to. A place where she might find acceptance rather than condemnation. Work that would provide security. And perhaps, though she scarcely dared admit it even to herself, the continued friendship of a man who saw her not as a fallen woman, but as a person worthy of respect. The following Sunday, Knox appeared at her door in his best shirt, freshly shaved, his usually unruly dark hair combed neatly. "I thought you might like to attend church this morning," he said when she opened the door. Jessamine stared at him in disbelief. "Church?" "Knox, you know I haven't been welcome there since—" "You have as much right to be there as anyone," he interrupted firmly. "More than some, I'd wager. Reverend Simmons practically told me not to return. Reverend Simmons isn't the final authority on who can seek God's house." Knox's jaw was set in a stubborn line she was coming to recognize. I'll be right beside you." She hesitated, torn between fear of the public humiliation that surely awaited and a longing to reclaim this small part of normal life. "I don't know." "Hold your head up," Knox said softly, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Walk beside me." Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. She nodded. "Give me a moment to get ready." 15 minutes later, they walked arm in arm toward the white clapboard church in the center of town. Jessamine wore her best dress, a blue calico that had been let out to accommodate her changing figure, and a straw bonnet with a faded ribbon that Knox had helped her refresh. She could feel the stares as they approached the church steps, heard the murmurs that followed their progress. "Shameless," someone whispered, flaunting her condition. Another voice added. Knox's arm tightened protectively around hers, but he didn't slow or acknowledge the whispers. As they reached the church steps, Reverend Simmons emerged from the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of them. "Miss Porter," he began, his tone making the address sound like an accusation, "I believe we discussed the appropriateness of your attendance." "Good morning, Reverend," Knox said pleasantly before Jessamine could respond. "Fine day for worship, isn't it?" "Mr. Keller, surely you understand that certain situations require discretion. Miss Porter's presence will be a distraction to the congregation and a poor example for the young ladies of our community." Knox's smile never wavered, though Jessamine felt the tension in his arm. "Funny thing about that, Reverend. I've been reading my Bible lately, that passage about not judging others lest ye be judged, and the one about he who is without sin casting the first stone. Powerful stuff." The Reverend's face flushed. "The church must uphold certain standards." "The church," Knox interrupted, his voice still pleasant but with steel beneath, "should be a refuge for all who seek comfort and guidance. Or did I misunderstand the teachings of Christ?" A small crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Among them, Jessamine noticed Mrs. Wallace, her expression sour, and beside her, the blacksmith's wife, who unexpectedly gave Jessamine a small, encouraging nod. The Reverend, aware of his audience, cleared his throat. "This is not the place for theological debate, Mr. Keller. No, it's a place of worship, so if you'll excuse us." Knox guided Jessamine past the flustered Reverend and into the church. They sat in the last pew, Knox's solid presence beside her a comfort as the congregation filled in around them, many casting curious or disapproving glances their way. The service passed in a blur for Jessamine, who was too aware of the attention to focus on the sermon. But when the final hymn was sung and they rose to leave, several women approached her with cautious smiles and quiet words of support. "You're welcome here anytime, dear," Mrs. Johnson, the elderly widow who lived near the schoolhouse, told her with a gentle pat on her arm. "If you need any baby things, I have some put away from when my Thomas was small," offered Mrs. Miller, the blacksmith's wife. Surprised and touched, Jessamine thanked them, feeling the sting of tears behind her eyes. Outside, as Knox escorted her home, Jessamine remained quiet, processing the events of the morning. "You're deep in thought," he observed as they turned onto her street. "I'm thinking that I've been hiding away, assuming everyone condemned me," she admitted. "But today showed me that's not entirely true. People can surprise you," Knox agreed. "Sometimes it just takes one person willing to stand up and break the silence." She looked up at him. "Like you did for me." "Anyone would have." "No," she interrupted firmly. "Not anyone. Most would have walked by, you didn't." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "You've changed everything, Knox Keller, and I've made my decision about Prescott." His expression grew attentive. "And I want to go to try for that fresh start you spoke of." She took a deep breath. "If your friend is still willing to consider me for the position." Knox's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "I'll write to Jim today. We can be ready to leave within the fortnight if that suits you. So soon." The reality of the decision suddenly struck her. Winter comes early in the Highlands. Better to travel before the weather turns. He studied her face. Having second thoughts, Jessamine glanced back at the town, at the familiar streets and buildings that had been her home for over a year. There were memories here, both good and painful. Her father was buried in the cemetery on the hill, but staying meant facing an increasingly difficult future alone. "No," she said finally. "No second thoughts, just acknowledging what I'm leaving behind." Knox nodded in understanding. Sometimes moving forward means saying goodbye to the past. Doesn't make it easy. "Will you truly come all the way to Prescott with me? What about your job at the mine?" "There are mines aplenty in this territory. Good men to work them are always needed." He shrugged as if the decision were the simplest thing in the world. "I'll find work again." Jessamine felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Seeing you and your little one safe and settled will be repayment enough." His voice was gruff with emotion he clearly wasn't accustomed to expressing. "Now, let's get you home. We've got plans to make." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Knox received a positive response from his friend Jim almost immediately, confirming that the position was Jessamine's if she wanted it, room and board included, with a small salary to boot. With that assurance, they began preparations for the journey. Knox arranged for a sturdy wagon and a team of reliable horses, outfitting it with a canvas cover to protect against sun and potential early autumn rains. Inside, he created a comfortable space for Jessamine with a proper mattress and ample blankets to cushion the inevitable jolts of the trail. News of their impending departure spread quickly through Superior. To Jessamine's surprise, not everyone's reaction was negative. Mrs. Miller arrived one afternoon with a basket of baby clothes and soft flannel blankets. "Every child deserves a warm welcome," she said simply, when Jessamine tried to thank her. Even Mrs. Wallace unbent enough to sell Knox provisions for their journey without her usual snide remarks, though she pointedly avoided addressing Jessamine directly. The night before their planned departure, Knox came to Jessamine's house for a final check of their preparations. They sat together on her porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and crimson. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Knox asked, noting the way her hands restlessly pleated and unpleated the fabric of her skirt. "A little," she admitted. "It's a long journey and in my condition." "We'll take it slow," he assured her. "I've planned for plenty of rest stops and we're in no great hurry." "Your comfort and safety come first," Jessamine smiled gratefully. "I know you've thought of everything." She hesitated, then added, "Knox, there's something I've been wondering." "What's that?" "After you see me safely to Prescott, what then? For you, I mean." Knox was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he said finally. "Find work somewhere, I suppose. Keep moving. You've been moving for a long time, haven't you?" He nodded slowly. "Since my sister died. Nowhere felt right to stay." Impulsively, Jessamine reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you for stopping long enough to help me." Knox turned his hand over to grasp hers gently. "Some things are worth stopping for, Jessamine Porter." The intensity in his blue eyes made her heart skip a beat. There was something unspoken in his gaze, something that both thrilled and frightened her. After William's betrayal, she had locked away any thought of romantic feelings, focusing solely on survival. But in that moment, with Knox's calloused hand warm around hers, she felt a flutter of possibility she hadn't dared acknowledge before. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion in the street, raised voices, and the sound of approaching footsteps. Knox was on his feet immediately, positioning himself protectively in front of Jessamine as a group of men appeared at her gate. Keller, the lead figure, stepped forward, and with a jolt of fear, Jessamine recognized Edward Barrett, father of the man who had abandoned her. "A word with you." Knox remained on the porch, his stance relaxed but alert. "Evening, Mr. Barrett. Kind of late for social calls." Barrett's face was flushed with either drink or anger, possibly both. Behind him stood 4 other men, including the saloon owner and the town's deputy sheriff. "Is it true you're taking the Porter girl to Prescott?" Barrett demanded. "Miss Porter and I are traveling to Prescott tomorrow, yes," Knox confirmed evenly. "Is there a problem with that?" Barrett stepped forward, his hand resting meaningfully on the revolver at his hip. "My son William is in Prescott on business. I won't have this. This woman pursuing him with her false accusations and embarrassing our family name." Jessamine felt a surge of indignation. "False accusations? Your son knows very well this child is his." "Silence, girl," Barrett snarled. "William is engaged to be married to the daughter of one of San Francisco's finest families. I won't have you ruining his prospects with your lies." Knox's voice remained calm, but Jessamine could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Barrett, Miss Porter is taking a position with a respectable rancher outside Prescott. She has no intention of pursuing your son." "So she says now," Barrett sneered. "But I know her kind. Once she's there, her kind," Knox interrupted, his tone dangerously quiet. "And what kind would that be exactly?" Barrett seemed to realize he'd crossed a line. He shifted tactics. "Look, Keller, this doesn't concern you. Step aside and let us talk some sense into the girl." 5 men coming to talk sense to a woman alone at night. Knox's hand moved casually closer to his own sidearm. "Doesn't sound like talking to me." The deputy, a young man named Phillips who looked uncomfortable with the situation, stepped forward. "Mr. Barrett just wants assurance she won't cause trouble for his family, Keller. That's all." "Then he has it," Knox replied. "Miss Porter wants nothing from the Barretts. She's moving on to build a new life, which is her right." Barrett's face darkened. "We don't want her leaving town with that baby. People will talk, questions will be asked." "So that's what this is really about," Knox said quietly. "Protecting your family's reputation by keeping Jessamine hidden away here, where you can control the story." "The child should be given to a proper family," Barrett insisted. "There are arrangements that can be made, discreetly." Jessamine gasped, instinctively placing a protective hand over her belly. "Never. This is my child." Barrett ignored her, focusing on Knox. "Be reasonable, Keller. This doesn't have to get ugly. Walk away now and we'll handle things properly." "I think you'd better leave," Knox said, his voice like steel. "Or what?" Barrett challenged. "You against the 5 of us, Edward." A new voice joined the confrontation as Dr. Abernathy, Superior's elderly physician, approached from the street. "What's going on here?" Barrett hesitated, clearly not wanting to explain his actions to the respected doctor. "This doesn't concern you, Doc." "I believe it does." The doctor looked past Barrett to Jessamine on the porch. "Miss Porter is my patient. I don't take kindly to seeing her harassed." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "We weren't harassing anyone, Doc, just having a conversation." 5 armed men confronting a pregnant woman at night. Dr. Abernathy raised a bushy eyebrow. "Interesting definition of conversation, Deputy Phillips." He turned to Barrett. "Whatever you're planning, Edward, I suggest you reconsider. Immediately." Barrett looked from the doctor to Knox, whose hand still hovered near his weapon, then back to his companions, some of whom were already backing away, unwilling to cross the town's only physician. "This isn't over," Barrett muttered, but the threat sounded hollow. He turned and stalked away, his supporters trailing after him. Dr. Abernathy watched them go, then climbed the steps to Jessamine's porch. "Are you all right, my dear?" Jessamine nodded, though she was visibly shaken. "Yes, thank you, doctor. How did you know to come?" Mrs. Miller saw Barrett and his friends heading this way, looking determined. "She sent her boy to fetch me." He patted her hand. "You have more friends in this town than you realize, Jessamine." "So it seems," she said softly. The doctor turned to Knox. "Barrett won't give up easily. His family's reputation means everything to him." Knox nodded grimly. "I figured as much. We're leaving at first light." A wise decision. Dr. Abernathy reached into his bag and pulled out a small packet. "Herbal tea for morning sickness and to help you sleep, Miss Porter. The journey will be taxing in your condition." He handed it to her with a kind smile. "I was planning to bring it by tomorrow, but it seems tonight was fortuitous." "You knew we were leaving?" Jessamine asked, surprised. The doctor's eyes twinkled. "Little happens in Superior that I don't hear about eventually." He grew serious again. "The trail to Prescott isn't easy this time of year. Take care of her, Mr. Keller." "With my life, doctor," Knox promised, and something in his tone made Jessamine's heart flutter again. After the doctor left, Knox insisted on staying the night, sleeping on a bedroll in the front room to ensure Barrett didn't return with reinforcements. Despite her protests that it wasn't proper, Jessamine was secretly relieved by his presence. The night passed peacefully, and they rose before dawn to make final preparations. As the first hint of sunrise lightened the eastern sky, Knox loaded the last of Jessamine's belongings into the wagon. She stood in the doorway of the small house, taking a final look at the place that had been her home. "Ready?" Knox asked gently. Jessamine nodded, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Yes, just saying goodbye." "We can wait a few more minutes if you need." "No," she interrupted, squaring her shoulders. "I'm ready to go." Knox helped her up onto the wagon seat, handling her as carefully as if she were made of porcelain, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion, and they rolled slowly out of Superior as the town began to stir for the day. As they passed the cemetery on the outskirts of town, Jessamine asked Knox to stop. He helped her down, and she walked alone to her father's grave, a simple wooden marker among dozens of others. Knox watched from a respectful distance as she knelt awkwardly, hindered by her pregnancy, and placed a small bunch of wildflowers she had gathered that morning on the freshly turned earth. Her lips moved in what might have been a prayer or a private farewell. After a few minutes, she rose and returned to the wagon, her expression composed though her eyes were red-rimmed. "He would have wanted me to be brave," she said simply, as Knox helped her back onto the seat. "You are brave," Knox assured her. "Braver than most." They set out again, following the rutted trail that led northwest toward Prescott. The journey would take them nearly 2 weeks at the careful pace Knox had planned, winding through rugged terrain, across high desert plateaus, and eventually into the pine-covered mountains surrounding their destination. The first day passed without incident. Knox was attentive to Jessamine's comfort, stopping frequently to allow her to rest and stretch her legs. By sunset, they had covered a respectable distance, and Knox made camp beside a small creek, constructing a comfortable sleeping area for Jessamine within the wagon while he prepared to sleep under the stars. "Are you sure you'll be warm enough out there?" Jessamine asked as she watched him spread his bedroll near the fire he'd built. October nights in the Arizona Territory could be surprisingly cold. "I've slept in worse conditions," Knox assured her with a smile. "Don't worry about me." As they shared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and cornbread Knox had prepared over the campfire, Jessamine found herself studying his profile in the flickering light. In the short time she'd known him, he had become her protector, her advocate, her friend. Yet there was still so much she didn't know about this quiet, capable man. "Tell me about your family," she said suddenly. "Besides your sister, I mean." Knox poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "Not much to tell. Father was a farmer in Missouri. Hard-working man, strict but fair. Mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just Pa, me, and my sister Martha. What happened to your father? Died in '74. Influenza took him in half the county that winter." Knox's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jessamine sensed the old grief beneath his words. "Martha and I sold the farm after that. She married a man from the next town over. I headed west, looking for something different from Missouri dirt. And you found cattle drives." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Found out I had a knack for it. Like the open country, the simplicity of the work. Moving from place to place suited me." "Until now," Jessamine observed softly. Knox looked up at her, the firelight reflecting in his blue eyes. "Maybe I've been moving long enough," he said after a moment. Something in his gaze made Jessamine's breath catch, but before she could respond, a distant coyote howled, breaking the moment. Knox rose and added more wood to the fire. "Best get some rest," he advised. "We've got a long way to go tomorrow." The next few days established a routine. They would rise with the dawn, share a simple breakfast, and set out as the sun cleared the horizon. Knox kept their pace steady but unhurried, mindful of Jessamine's condition and the rough terrain. Each night, he would make camp, prepare their meals, and ensure Jessamine was comfortable before settling himself nearby to keep watch. As they traveled, the landscape changed gradually around them, the sparse desert vegetation giving way to grasslands, and eventually the beginnings of pine forest as they gained elevation. With each mile, Jessamine felt the burden of Superior's judgment falling away, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories and observations. Knox proved to be surprisingly well-read for a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, able to discuss everything from Shakespeare, whom he admitted reading during the long, quiet nights on cattle drives, to current political affairs. "My father believed education was important, even for a farmer's son," he explained when Jessamine expressed surprise at his knowledge of literature. "We might not have had much, but we had books." In turn, Jessamine told him about her childhood in Chicago, where her father had worked as a bookkeeper for a large mercantile company before the opportunity in Arizona had drawn them west. "He wanted adventure," she explained with a sad smile. "Said he'd spent too many years looking at the same four walls. Arizona was going to be our fresh start." "Seems you're getting that fresh start after all," Knox observed. "Just not the way either of you planned." Jessamine rested her hand on her rounded belly. "No, not the way we planned at all." She glanced at him. "Life rarely goes according to plan, does it?" "Rarely," Knox agreed. "But sometimes the unexpected turns out better than anything we could have planned." On the 5th day of their journey, as they were crossing a particularly desolate stretch of high desert, Knox noticed a dust cloud on the horizon behind them. "Riders," he said tersely, reaching for the rifle he kept beside the seat. Jessamine turned to look, her heart racing. "Do you think it's Barrett? Can't tell yet, but best be prepared." Knox guided the wagon toward a stand of junipers that would provide some cover and halted the team. "Stay in the wagon," he instructed as he helped her into the back. "If there's trouble, keep your head down." Jessamine nodded, fear clutching at her throat as she watched Knox position himself strategically with his rifle at the ready. The riders were closer now, a group of perhaps 3 or 4 approaching at a steady pace. "They've seen us," Knox muttered. "No point trying to hide now." The minutes that followed were among the longest of Jessamine's life as she huddled in the wagon, one hand protectively covering her belly, the other clutching a small derringer that Knox had insisted she keep with her. She could hear the thundering of hooves growing louder, then slowing as the riders apparently approached their position. "That's far enough," she heard Knox call out, his voice carrying the unmistakable warning of a man prepared to defend what was his. A familiar voice responded, sending a chill down Jessamine's spine. "No need for hostility, Keller. Just wanted to make sure Miss Porter arrived safely at her destination." Barrett. He'd followed them after all. "She's not going back to Superior," Knox stated flatly. "Turn around and ride away while you still can." "Now, that's not very neighborly," Barrett replied, his tone falsely congenial. "We've got a proposition that might interest both of you." Jessamine couldn't stand the suspense any longer. Carefully, she moved to the front of the wagon where she could see what was happening. Barrett sat astride his horse about 20 yards away, flanked by 2 other men she recognized from town, his foreman and the deputy sheriff. "Miss Porter," Barrett acknowledged her with a nod that might have seemed polite if not for the coldness in his eyes. "I've been thinking about our situation." "There is no our situation," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your son made his choice when he abandoned me and his child." Barrett's expression hardened. "William made a mistake, one that could cost our family dearly if not handled properly." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "I have here $500. It's yours, in exchange for your written statement that my son is not the father of your child." Jessamine stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to lie, to deny my baby its true parentage?" "I want you to be practical," Barrett countered. $500 is a substantial sum. It would give you and the child a new start, free from scandal. All you need to do is sign a simple document. And if I refuse," Barrett's smile didn't reach his eyes, "then things become more complicated. Prescott is a small community, Miss Porter. Word travels. It would be unfortunate if your reputation preceded you." "That sounds like a threat," Knox said quietly, his rifle still trained on Barrett. "A reality," Barrett corrected. "No decent household will employ a woman of questionable virtue. No respectable community will accept her or her bastard child. Unless, of course, she has the means to establish herself independently." He held up the envelope again. $500 would provide that means. For a brief, terrible moment, Jessamine was tempted. The money would indeed provide security for her and her child, a buffer against an uncertain future. But the cost denying her baby its rightful heritage, absolving William of his responsibility, allowing Barrett to dictate the terms of her life was too high. "Keep your money, Mr. Barrett," she said firmly. "I won't lie about my child's father, not for any amount." Barrett's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake, girl, a costly one." "The only mistake I made was trusting your son was a man of honor," Jessamine replied, finding strength in her anger. "I won't compound that error by dealing with you." The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Edward, we should head back. This isn't worth bloodshed." Barrett ignored him, his gaze fixed on Jessamine. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Knox interjected, his voice hard as steel. "You've made your offer. It's been refused. Now ride away before this gets ugly." For a tense moment, Barrett seemed to consider pressing the issue. His hand hovered near his sidearm, and Jessamine held her breath, terrified that violence would erupt. But something in Knox's unwavering stance must have convinced him of the futility of further confrontation. "You'll regret this decision," Barrett said finally, tucking the envelope back into his coat. "Both of you." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his companions following close behind. Only when they were distant specks on the horizon did Knox lower his rifle. He turned to Jessamine, concern evident in his features. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling. "Yes. Do you think he'll follow us to Prescott?" Knox's expression was grim. "He might. Barrett's the type who doesn't like losing." He climbed back onto the wagon seat. "We'll need to be more careful from here on. Change our route a bit, maybe." As they resumed their journey, Jessamine found herself replaying the confrontation in her mind. $500 is a lot of money," she said after a while. "It is," Knox agreed, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. "Would have made things easier for you and the baby, at least at first." "But at what cost?" She sighed, resting her hand on her belly where the baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing her distress. "I couldn't do it. Couldn't deny this child its true identity, even if it meant security." Knox glanced at her, admiration clear in his gaze. "Takes courage to choose integrity over comfort. Not everyone would make the same choice." "Would you have?" she asked, curious. He considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think so. My pa always said a man's word and his honor are the only things that truly belong to him. Can't put a price on either." They rode in thoughtful silence for a while, each contemplating the confrontation and its implications for their journey. The encounter with Barrett had shaken Jessamine more than she wanted to admit, not just because of the threat he represented, but because of the ugly truth his presence forced her to acknowledge that no matter how far she traveled, the circumstances of her child's birth would always shadow them both. "What if he's right?" she asked suddenly, giving voice to her deepest fear. "What if no respectable community will accept us? What if my child grows up bearing the burden of my mistake?" Knox reined the horses to a halt and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Jessamine. What happened between you and William Barrett wasn't your mistake alone. He made promises he didn't keep. He shirked his responsibility. That's on him, not you. But the world doesn't see it that way, does it? Women bear the shame while men walk away untouched." There was bitterness in her voice that surprised even her. "Some do," Knox acknowledged, "but not all. Jim Hollister isn't that kind of man. Prescott isn't that kind of place. And times are changing, slowly but surely." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Your child will grow up knowing love and respect. I promise you that." The certainty in his voice, the steady warmth of his hand around hers, brought unexpected tears to Jessamine's eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'll make sure of it," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for him to assume such responsibility for her and her unborn child. Before she could respond, he had released her hand and set the horses in motion again, but his words lingered in the air between them. A promise Jessamine found herself desperately wanting to believe. The days that followed were uneventful, their journey continuing through increasingly dramatic landscapes as they approached the mountains surrounding Prescott. Knox remained vigilant, choosing their campsites carefully and keeping his weapons close at hand, but there was no further sign of Barrett or his men. As they traveled, Jessamine noticed subtle changes in Knox's behavior toward her. He had always been attentive and protective, but now there was an added tenderness in the way he helped her in and out of the wagon, in how he prepared her meals with special care, in the way his gaze often lingered on her when he thought she wouldn't notice. For her part, Jessamine found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the sound of his voice, the rare but transformative nature of his smile. It was dangerous territory, these nascent feelings. After William's betrayal, she had vowed never to trust her heart to a man again, to focus solely on providing for her child. Yet with each passing day, with each kindness Knox showed her, that vow became harder to keep. On the 10th day of their journey, as they made their way through a pine-forested pass, dark clouds gathered overhead, and the air turned sharp with the scent of approaching rain. "Storm coming," Knox observed, studying the sky with concern. "We need to find shelter before it hits." He urged the team forward, searching for a suitable place to wait out the weather. They were in luck just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. They came upon an abandoned line shack, likely used by cowboys during seasonal cattle drives. The small cabin was crude but solid, with a stone fireplace and enough space for them to bring in their essential supplies. Knox quickly unhitched the horses and led them to the lean-to attached to the cabin, while Jessamine gathered what they would need for the night from the wagon. By the time everything was secured, the storm had unleashed its full fury. Rain lashed at the windows and roof, and wind howled through the trees surrounding the cabin. Inside, Knox built a fire that soon filled the single room with welcome warmth and light. "Looks like we'll be here for the night," he said, hanging his wet coat near the fireplace to dry. "Maybe longer, depending on how the trail conditions are after this." Jessamine nodded, arranging their bedding on opposite sides of the cabin's small space. The intimate confines made her acutely aware of Knox's presence in a way their outdoor camps had not. Here, in this snug shelter with rain drumming on the roof and the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, the world beyond seemed distant and unimportant. They prepared a simple meal together, moving around each other in the small space with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. As they ate, seated on blankets near the fire, conversation flowed naturally between them. "We should reach Prescott in 3 days if the weather clears," Knox said, passing her a cup of coffee. "Jim's ranch is about 10 miles outside town." Jessamine nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of something like disappointment at the thought of their journey ending. "What's he like, your friend?" "Jim, salt of the earth. Honest as the day is long, built his ranch from nothing after the war started with just 20 acres and a handful of cattle. Now he's got one of the most respected spreads in the territory." Knox smiled fondly. "He's got a good heart, too. Takes in strays of all kinds, people and animals alike." "He sounds wonderful," Jessamine said sincerely. "I hope I can be useful to him." "You will be. Jim's no hand with figures or correspondence. Says he'd rather wrestle a mountain lion than balance a ledger." Knox chuckled at some private memory. "You'll be doing him a favor, believe me." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain hammering against the roof and windows, wind moaning around the eaves of the cabin. Inside, the fire crackled merrily, casting a golden glow over the rustic interior. As Jessamine moved to clear away their dishes, a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin, making her start. At the same moment, the baby chose to deliver a forceful kick and she gasped. Dropping the tin plate she was holding, Knox was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "What is it? Are you all right?" "Yes, just startled," she assured him, then smiled and added, "and someone else is restless tonight." Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on the side of her belly where the baby was most active. Knox's expression transformed from concern to wonder as he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. "That's remarkable," he whispered, his eyes wide with amazement. The intimacy of the moment struck them both simultaneously. Knox started to withdraw his hand, but Jessamine impulsively covered it with her own, keeping it in place as the baby continued its acrobatics. "I think he or she likes you," she said softly. "Usually settles down this time of evening." Knox's gaze lifted from her belly to meet her eyes, and the warmth and longing she saw there took her breath away. Jessamine, Whatever he had been about to say was lost as another fierce gust rattled the cabin, this time accompanied by a sharp crack from outside. They both turned toward the sound. A tree branch, probably, Knox said, reluctantly withdrawing his hand from her belly. I'd better check on the horses. He donned his coat and stepped outside into the tempest, leaving Jessamine alone with the echo of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. When he returned a few minutes later, soaked to the skin despite the brief excursion, the moment had passed. They settled into their respective bedrolls on opposite sides of the cabin, the fire between them casting long shadows on the walls. Sleep eluded Jessamine as she lay listening to the storm, and the occasional soft sounds of Knox shifting in his blankets. Her mind replayed the feeling of his hand on her belly, the look in his eyes that had sparked an answering warmth deep within her. It was dangerous to hope, to want, to dream of possibilities beyond mere survival. Yet in the cocoon of the storm-bound cabin, such dreams seemed less impossible than they had before. "Knox," she whispered into the semi-darkness, unsure if he was still awake. "Hum?" His response was immediate, suggesting he too had been lying awake. "Thank you for everything. For helping me when no one else would, for believing in me." There was a rustle of movement as he turned toward her voice. "You don't need to thank me, Jessamine. I do, though. You've changed my life, given me hope when I thought all was lost." She hesitated, then added softly, "You make me feel like maybe I deserve something good after all." "You do deserve good things," he said with quiet intensity. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "So do you, Knox Keller." "So do you." Neither spoke again, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that ran deeper than gratitude or obligation. As Jessamine finally drifted toward sleep, lulled by the rhythmic sound of rain and the steady presence of the man across the room, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with raindrops in the morning sunlight. They resumed their journey with renewed energy, both of them aware of the subtle but significant change in their relationship, though neither gave it voice. The final days of their trip passed without incident, the terrain growing increasingly mountainous and forested as they approached Prescott. On the afternoon of the 13th day, they crested a rise and saw spread before them a valley cradling a proper town, not a rough mining settlement like Superior, but an established community with proper buildings, churches, and tree-lined streets. "Prescott," Knox announced with satisfaction. "Territorial capital until just recently." Jessamine looked with interest at what would be her new home. From this distance, Prescott appeared orderly and prosperous, its buildings clustered around a central plaza where she could make out what looked like a courthouse. "It's larger than I expected," she commented as they began the descent into the valley. "Nearly 5,000 people now, Jim tells me. Got everything you'd expect of a proper town: shops, schools, even a theater." Knox pointed to the west. "Jim's ranch is that way in the foothills. We'll reach it before sunset." As they drove through Prescott, Jessamine noted the curious glances they received, not hostile, merely interested in the newcomers. Several people nodded or waved to Knox, who returned their greetings with easy familiarity. "You know quite a few people here," she observed. "Spent some time in the area years back," he explained. "Cowboying for the bar tea outfit before Jim started his own spread." He smiled faintly. "Prescott's the kind of place where folks remember you, even after years away." They passed through town and continued west along a well-maintained road that wound through rolling hills covered with ponderosa pine. After about an hour, Knox turned the wagon onto a narrower track marked by a wooden sign bearing a stylized Circle H brand. "Hollister's Ranch," he explained, a note of pride in his voice. "One of the best in the territory." The track led them through a stand of massive pines and then opened onto a vista that took Jessamine's breath away. Below them lay a verdant valley cradled by mountains, with a clear stream winding through meadows where cattle grazed peacefully. Near the center of the valley stood a substantial log home with several outbuildings, smoke curling from the chimney against the backdrop of the setting sun. "It's beautiful," Jessamine said softly. Knox nodded in agreement. "Jim chose well when he settled here. Good water, good grazing, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms." As they approached the ranch house, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair emerged onto the porch, shading his eyes against the setting sun. When he recognized Knox, a wide grin split his weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned. Knox Keller, right on time as always." He strode toward them with the rolling gait of a lifelong horseman. Knox halted the wagon and jumped down, meeting his friend with a hearty handshake that turned into a brief, back-slapping embrace. "Jim, good to see you, old friend." "Likewise, boy, likewise." Jim Hollister, for this was clearly Knox's friend, turned his attention to Jessamine, still seated in the wagon. His keen eyes took in her condition with a quick glance, but his smile never wavered. "And this must be Miss Porter." Knox helped Jessamine down from the wagon with gentle hands. "Jessamine Porter, meet James Hollister, the best cattleman in Arizona Territory and a fair friend besides." Jim removed his hat and gave a slight bow that would have seemed incongruous from such a rugged figure if not executed with such natural grace. "Miss Porter, welcome to the Circle H. Knox's letter spoke highly of your abilities. We're mighty pleased to have you join us." His manner was so genuinely welcoming, with no hint of judgment regarding her condition, that Jessamine felt immediate relief. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Hollister. I'll work hard to justify your confidence." "Jim, please, we don't stand on ceremony here." He gestured toward the house. "You must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside and meet Maria. She keeps house for me and will show you to your quarters." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined for a bachelor's dwelling, with polished wood floors, comfortable furnishings, and walls lined with bookshelves. Jim led them into a spacious kitchen where a middle-aged Mexican woman was preparing dinner. "Maria, our guests have arrived," Jim announced. "Miss Porter will be taking the position we discussed." Maria turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron, and gave Jessamine a warm smile. "Welcome, Miss Porter. Your room is ready for you. It's not grand, but it's comfortable and has its own small stove for when the baby comes." Once again, Jessamine was struck by the matter-of-fact acceptance of her condition. No judgment, no whispers, just practical consideration for her needs. Tears of relief stung her eyes, which she tried to blink away before anyone noticed. Knox noticed, of course. He always did. His hand came to rest briefly, reassuringly, on the small of her back before he turned to Jim. "Wagon needs unloading before dark," he said. "Miss Porter's things should go to her room." "Of course," Jim agreed. "But first, you both look like you could use some refreshment. Maria's coffee is the best this side of the Mississippi." The next hour passed in a blur for Jessamine. Maria showed her to a cozy room off the kitchen, private, comfortable, and, as promised, equipped with its own small stove. There was even a cradle in the corner, a thoughtful provision that brought fresh tears to Jessamine's eyes. "Was your wife's," Maria explained, noting her reaction. "Senor Jim kept it after she passed, said someday it might be needed again." "It's perfect," Jessamine whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Please thank Mr. Hollister for me. You can thank him yourself at dinner, Maria replied with a smile. Now rest a while. I'll call when the meal is ready. Left alone, Jessamine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. After months of judgment and hostility in Superior, the simple acceptance she'd found at Circle H seemed almost too good to be true. Jim Hollister was exactly as Knox had described him: straightforward, kind, and without pretension. Maria clearly ran the household with quiet efficiency. And Knox had brought her to this safe harbor, had defended and protected her, had shown her kindness when she needed it most. What would happen now that their journey was complete? Would he stay at Circle H for a time, or would his wandering spirit take him elsewhere? The thought of him leaving created an ache in her chest she wasn't prepared for. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair, served at a long table in the dining room. Besides Jim, Knox, and Jessamine, there were two ranch hands: Tom, the foreman, a laconic older man with kind eyes, and Miguel, a young Mexican vaquero who had been with Jim since the ranch's early days. The conversation flowed easily, focusing mainly on ranch business and local news, with no one making Jessamine feel like an outsider. After the meal, as Maria cleared the dishes, Jim invited Knox and Jessamine to join him in his study for coffee. The room was a reflection of its owner: practical but comfortable, with a large desk covered in papers, walls lined with books, and a few quality pieces of furniture that spoke of good taste rather than ostentation. Now then, Jim said once they were settled, let's discuss the particulars of your position, Miss Porter. He outlined her duties, which would include keeping the ranch accounts, handling correspondence, and managing the household budget. The salary he offered was more than fair, especially considering the room and board included for her, and soon her child. I hope the arrangements are satisfactory, Jim concluded. Knox mentioned in his letter that you're an educated woman with experience in bookkeeping. My father was an accountant, Jessamine confirmed. He taught me his methods from an early age. The arrangement is more than satisfactory, Mr. Hall. Jim, I'm grateful for the opportunity. Excellent. You can start whenever you feel ready. Jim gestured to the chaotic desk. As you can see, I'm in desperate need of your skills. Knox, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. The baby is due in about 3 months. Jessamine will need time to prepare and recover afterward. The casual use of her given name and his obvious concern for her welfare sent a warm flutter through Jessamine's chest. Jim nodded thoughtfully. Of course, Maria will help with the baby when the time comes, and you can ease into your duties as you're able. He smiled kindly at Jessamine. This is a working ranch, Miss Porter, but we're not slave drivers. Your health and your child's well-being come first. Thank you, Jessamine said softly, once again moved by the kindness of these virtual strangers. The conversation shifted to other matters, but Jessamine found her attention drifting as fatigue from the journey caught up with her. She tried to stifle a yawn, but Knox noticed immediately. Jessamine needs rest, he said, rising from his chair. It's been a long journey. Jim stood as well. Of course, we'll have plenty of time to talk in the days ahead. He turned to Jessamine with a warm smile. Welcome to Circle H, Miss Porter. I hope you'll be happy here. I believe I will, she replied sincerely. Knox escorted her back to her room, his hand solicitous at her elbow. At her door he paused, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the hallway. Is everything all right? She asked, sensing his hesitation. Just making sure you're settled, he replied. Jim's a good man, you'll be safe here. Thanks to you, she said softly. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all you've done. Knox shook his head. No repayment necessary, just... He paused, seeming to struggle for words, which was unusual for him. "Just be happy, Jessamine. That's all I want for you." There was something in his tone, a note of finality perhaps, that sent a chill through her. "You sound as if you're saying goodbye." Knox looked away, confirming her fear. "I should move on soon. Jim doesn't need another hand, and I've imposed on his hospitality before." "But you just got here," Jessamine protested, unable to keep the dismay from her voice. "Surely you could stay a little while, rest from the journey at least." "A few days, perhaps," he conceded, "but no more than that." Jessamine wanted to argue, to beg him to stay longer, but pride stopped her. Knox Keller had already done more for her than anyone could have expected. She had no right to ask for more of his time, his attention, his presence that had become so vital to her. "I understand," she said, though her heart rebelled against the words. "Good night, Knox." "Good night, Jessamine." He hesitated, as if there were more he wanted to say, then simply tipped his hat and turned away. Jessamine closed her door and leaned against it, tears threatening once again. She had known all along that Knox would eventually leave. He was a wanderer by nature, unbound by permanent ties. That she had come to care for him, to depend on his steadfast presence, was her own weakness, not his obligation. Still, as she prepared for bed in her new room, in this new home that already felt welcoming, she couldn't help but wish that Knox Keller might find a reason to stay. The days that followed established a routine at Circle H. Jessamine began to familiarize herself with the ranch's accounts, which were indeed in desperate need of organization. Jim proved to be an excellent employer, fair, appreciative of her skills, and considerate of her condition. Maria took Jessamine under her wing, showing her the workings of the household and sharing her knowledge of what to expect when the baby came. Knox, true to his word, remained at the ranch, helping with various tasks around the property. Jessamine saw him daily at meals and occasionally throughout the day as he worked around the main house, repairing a loose board here, a leaky roof there. He was unfailingly kind and respectful toward her, but she sensed a new reserve in his manner, as if he were already distancing himself in preparation for his departure. A week after their arrival, Jim announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Prescott for supplies and invited Jessamine to accompany him. "Thought you might like to see the town properly," he explained. "Meet some folks, get acquainted with what Prescott has to offer." Jessamine accepted gratefully. As comfortable as Circle H was proving to be, she had begun to feel restless, eager to explore her new community. Knox, seated across the table, looked up from his coffee. "I'll come along," he said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "Help with the loading." Jim raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on Knox's evident protectiveness. "Certainly. More hands make lighter work." They set out after breakfast in Jim's wagon, a more comfortable conveyance than the one that had brought Knox and Jessamine from Superior. The autumn day was crisp and clear, the mountains surrounding Prescott vivid against the blue sky. As they traveled, Jim pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, proving to be an entertaining guide. In town, Jim had various errands to attend to, and Knox volunteered to accompany him, suggesting that Jessamine might enjoy exploring the shops along Montezuma Street at her own pace. "We'll meet you at the hotel for lunch at noon," Jim proposed. "The dining room at the palace serves the best meal in town." Jessamine agreed to the plan, secretly relieved at the opportunity for some independence after the constant companionship of the journey. She spent a pleasant morning browsing through the shops, purchasing a few necessities, and some yarn for the baby blanket she had begun knitting. To her relief, the townspeople she encountered were polite and welcoming, with none of the judgmental stares she had grown accustomed to in Superior. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Carter, engaged her in friendly conversation, asking about her connection to Circle H and when her baby was due. February. God willing, Jessamine replied, braced for the inevitable change in manner that usually followed such admissions from an unmarried woman. But Mrs. Carter merely nodded and said, "My sister's expecting her fourth about then. If you're in need of any baby things, you come see me. I keep a good stock of flannel and such." Stunned by the matter-of-fact acceptance, Jessamine could only nod and thank her. As noon approached, she made her way to the Palace Hotel, an impressive two-story structure that dominated the corner of Montezuma and Gurley streets. Inside, the dining room was elegant by frontier standards, with crisp white tablecloths and polished silverware. Jim and Knox were already waiting, and Jim rose to pull out her chair as she approached. "Did you enjoy your morning, Miss Porter?" "Very much," she replied sincerely. "Prescott is a lovely town. Everyone has been so friendly." "It's a good community," Jim agreed. "Folks here tend to mind their own business and judge a person by their actions, not their circumstances." Knox, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. No sign of Barrett or his men. So that explained his vigilance. Jessamine had almost forgotten the threat in the pleasant routine of the past week. "Do you really think they would follow us all the way to Prescott?" "Probably not," Knox admitted, "but better to be cautious." "Barrett?" Jim inquired, his expression curious. Knox briefly explained the situation, including Barrett's attempt to buy Jessamine's silence about his son's responsibility for her child. Jim's face darkened as he listened. "Despicable," he pronounced when Knox had finished. "Using money and threats to shirk family responsibility." He turned to Jessamine. "You were right to refuse him, Miss Porter. A man who won't acknowledge his own blood has no honor." "My thoughts exactly," Knox agreed, his blue eyes meeting Jessamine's across the table. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of their food, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Jim was clearly well respected in Prescott. Throughout the meal, various townspeople stopped by their table to greet him and were introduced to Jessamine. Among them was the town's doctor, a younger man named Elliot who had taken over the practice from his father 2 years prior. "Dr. Elliot maintains a regular schedule at Circle H," Jim explained. "Checks on the hands, tends to any injuries. I've taken the liberty of adding your name to his list of patients." Jessamine was touched by the thoughtfulness. "That's very kind. Thank you." "Not at all," Jim replied easily. "Can't have the mother of the Circle H's newest resident without proper care." The way he phrased it, as if her child was already accepted as part of the ranch family, brought a lump to Jessamine's throat. She glanced at Knox, who was watching her with a softness in his gaze that made her heart ache with unspoken longing. Their return to the ranch that afternoon was delayed by a sudden autumn shower that had them waiting under the awning of the general store until it passed. By the time they arrived back at Circle H, the sun was setting, painting the rain-washed landscape in hues of gold and rose. That evening after dinner, Jessamine found Knox alone on the porch, smoking a cigarette as he gazed out at the gathering darkness. She hesitated, then joined him, drawing her shawl more closely around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Beautiful night," she observed, following his gaze to where the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Knox nodded, extinguishing his cigarette. "One of the things I've always loved about this country, the stars, seem closer somehow out here. Are you still planning to leave soon?" The question escaped before she could reconsider it. Knox was silent for a long moment. "Jim's offered me work," he said finally. "Says he could use another experienced hand, especially with winter coming on." Hope fluttered in Jessamine's chest. "And will you accept?" "Been thinking on it." Knox turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Would you want me to stay, Jessamine?" The directness of the question took her breath away. Yes, I would." "Why?" His voice was gentle but insistent, as if her answer mattered more than she could know. Jessamine considered prevaricating, offering some practical reason for wanting his continued presence. But something in his steady gaze demanded honesty. "Because I've come to care for you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I thought possible after William. Because when you're near, I feel safe, not just physically, but here." She pressed a hand to her heart. "And because the thought of you leaving hurts more than I want to admit." Knox's expression softened and he took a step closer. "I've been fighting it," he confessed. "These feelings for you. Told myself it wasn't right you being in such a vulnerable position, carrying another man's child, needing my help. Didn't want you to feel obligated or grateful in a way that might be mistaken for something else." "It's not gratitude," Jessamine said firmly, "or obligation. What I feel for you is something I never felt for William, even when I thought I loved him." Knox reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "I've never been much for putting down roots," he said softly. "Always thought I was meant to keep moving, like my life was somewhere over the next horizon. And now I'm thinking maybe what I've been looking for has been right beside me these past weeks." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her jaw. "I'd like to stay, Jessamine, not just for the work but for you, for a chance to see where this might lead, if you'll have me." Jessamine's heart soared at his words. "I'd like that very much, Knox Keller." He smiled then, a full, unreserved smile that transformed his features and made him look younger, unburdened. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Give you time to be sure. There's no rush." Jessamine nodded, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through her. "Thank you for understanding." Knox straightened, though he kept hold of her hand. "It's getting chilly. You should go inside." "Will you come in?" He shook his head with a rueful smile. "Best if I stay out here a bit longer. Need to think about what to tell Jim in the morning. About the job offer, about that, and about my intentions toward his bookkeeper." Knox's expression turned serious again. "I want to do this right, Jessamine. No secrets, no whispers. You and your child deserve nothing less." The mention of her baby reminded Jessamine of the reality of their situation, that any life with Knox would include a child that wasn't his. A child whose existence would always be a reminder of her past with William Barrett. As if reading her thoughts, Knox placed a gentle hand on her rounded belly. "This little one is part of the package," he said softly. "A blessing, not a burden." Tears welled in Jessamine's eyes at his words. "You're a good man, Knox Keller." "Not always," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I'm trying to be the man you deserve." With a final gentle squeeze of her hand, he released her. "Good night, Jessamine. Sleep well." "Good night, Knox." She turned to go inside, then paused and looked back at him. "I'm glad you're staying." His smile in the gathering darkness was all the response she needed. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Jessamine's life. Knox did indeed accept Jim's offer of employment, taking on the role of assistant foreman with a natural authority that earned him the respect of the other hands. He moved into the bunkhouse with the rest of the men, maintaining a proper distance that satisfied propriety while their relationship developed. And develop it did, in a slow, steady progression that allowed them both to adjust to this unexpected turn in their lives. Knox called on Jessamine formally, escorting her to Sunday services in Prescott and occasionally to dinner at the Palace Hotel. On the ranch, they found moments together, conversations on the porch after dinner, walks along the creek on pleasant afternoons, quiet evenings by the fire in the main house where Knox would read aloud from one of Jim's books while Jessamine worked on the baby blanket she was knitting. Jim watched their courtship with benevolent approval, never interfering but making it clear through word and deed that he considered them both part of his extended family. Maria, more demonstrative in her affection, took to preparing special treats when Knox came calling and offering motherly advice to Jessamine about matters of the heart. As Jessamine's pregnancy progressed, her bond with Knox deepened. He was endlessly patient with her changing moods and physical discomforts, always ready with a supportive arm when walking became difficult, or a sympathetic ear when her fears about motherhood overwhelmed her. One crisp December afternoon, as they sat together on a bench near the creek, Jessamine confessed her deepest anxiety. "What if I'm not a good mother? I never knew my own. She died when I was so young. What if I don't know what to do?" Knox considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think being a good parent isn't something you're born knowing," he said finally. "It's something you learn day by loving your child and doing your best." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "And you won't be alone, Jessamine. You'll have Maria and Jim and—" He hesitated, then continued with determination. "And you'll have me if you want me." Jessamine looked up at him, reading the emotion in his clear blue eyes. "What are you saying, Knox?" "I'm saying I love you, Jessamine Porter. I love your strength and your gentleness, your courage and your heart." He shifted on the bench to face her more directly. "I'm saying I want to build a life with you and your child if you'll have me. Not right away, I know you need time, and there's the baby coming first. But someday when you're ready." Jessamine's heart swelled with joy at his declaration. Her response was interrupted by a sharp pain that made her gasp and clutch her belly. Knox was immediately alert, his expression changing from tender to concerned. "What is it? The baby?" Jessamine nodded, trying to catch her breath as the pain subsided. "Just a twinge. Dr. Elliott said to expect them as the time grows closer." But Knox wasn't taking any chances. With gentle insistence, he helped her to her feet and supported her back to the house, where Maria took one look at Jessamine's pale face and ordered her to bed for the rest of the day. The false alarm passed, but it served as a reminder that Jessamine's confinement was approaching. Dr. Elliott, during his next visit to the ranch, confirmed that everything appeared normal but advised her to rest more as her February due date drew near. Christmas at Circle H was a festive affair, with the ranch house decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a proper tree set up in the parlor. Jim hosted a celebration for all the hands and their families, complete with a feast prepared by Maria and gifts for everyone. Knox's gift to Jessamine was a small silver locket, simple but elegant. "For you to keep a remembrance of those you love," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Jessamine touched it reverently. "It's beautiful, thank you." Her gift to him was a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes. "To keep you warm on cold mornings," she said as he wrapped it around his neck with evident pleasure. Their courtship continued through January, growing deeper and more certain with each passing day. Knox began spending his evenings sketching plans for a small house on a piece of land. Jim had offered him as part of his compensation a place of your own, when the time comes. Jim had said with a knowing look at both of them. February arrived with unseasonable warmth, the snow in the valley melting to reveal the first hints of green beneath. Jessamine, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, found herself restless and uncomfortable, eager for the baby's arrival yet apprehensive about the ordeal ahead. Knox was her constant support, attentive without being overbearing, present without being intrusive. He had taken to reading books on childcare that Jim had procured from Prescott, determined to be useful when the time came. The time came sooner than expected. In the pre-dawn hours of February 10th, Jessamine woke to a sharp, insistent pain that told her this was not another false alarm. She managed to make her way to Maria's room, where the older woman took one look at her and immediately sprang into action, sending one of the ranch hands to fetch Dr. Elliot from town while she prepared the birthing room she had set up in advance. Knox, awakened by the commotion, appeared at Jessamine's door, his face taut with concern. "Is it time?" Maria answered for her as another contraction seized Jessamine's body. "Yes, it is time. Now go, make yourself useful elsewhere. This is women's work." Though clearly reluctant to leave, Knox respected Maria's authority in the matter. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he promised Jessamine, squeezing her hand before Maria firmly ushered him out. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Dr. Elliot arrived mid-morning and remained at Jessamine's side, his calm competence a reassurance during the most challenging hours. Outside the birthing room, Knox paced the hallway like a caged mountain lion, deaf to Jim's suggestions that he get some rest, or at least sit down. Every cry from within sent him to the door, only to be shooed back by Maria's stern glare. Finally, as the clock in the parlor struck midnight, a new sound pierced the tense atmosphere, the lusty cry of a newborn taking its first breath. Knox froze in his tracks, his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for news. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened, and Dr. Elliot emerged, tired but smiling. "Congratulations," he said to Knox, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to address him as the expectant father. "Miss Porter has a healthy son." A son. Jessamine had a son. Knox felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "And Jessamine, is she all right?" "Exhausted but well," the doctor assured him. "She's asking for you." Knox hesitated. "Is it proper? Should I wait until—" "Go to her," Jim urged from where he sat nearby, having kept a quiet vigil of his own. "Propriety be damned." With a grateful nod, Knox entered the room where Jessamine lay propped against pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but radiant with a joy that transformed her. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she had prepared, was a tiny bundle from which emerged a shock of dark hair and a small red face. "Knox," she whispered as he approached the bed, "come meet my son." Knox moved closer, his movements careful and reverent as if approaching something sacred. Jessamine shifted the bundle so he could see the infant's face more clearly. "He's perfect," Knox breathed, awestruck by the tiny features, the miniature hands curled into fists. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Jessamine offered. Surprise and uncertainty flashed across Knox's face. "I wouldn't know how, he's so small." "Like this," Jessamine demonstrated, then carefully transferred the newborn into Knox's large, work-roughened hands. The contrast was striking, the tiny, helpless infant cradled in the arms of the strong man whose face reflected wonder, tenderness, and something that looked very much like love. The baby stirred, opening unfocused eyes briefly before settling back into sleep, apparently content in Knox's careful embrace. "What will you name him?" Knox asked softly, unable to tear his gaze from the child. Jessamine had given this much thought during the long months of her pregnancy. "Thomas, after my father," she said. "Thomas Knox Porter." Knox's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Knox," Jessamine nodded, her eyes soft with affection. Without you, he might not have survived. I might not have survived. It seems fitting he should carry your name if that's all right with you." Knox swallowed hard, clearly moved beyond words. "I'd be honored," he managed finally, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I can say." Maria, who had been quietly tidying the room, approached and held out her arms for the baby. "Time for this little one to rest, and his mama too," she said firmly. "You can come back in the morning, Señor Knox." Reluctantly, Knox surrendered the infant to her capable hands, then turned back to Jessamine. Heedless of Maria's presence, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Rest now," he murmured. "I'll be close by if you need me." Jessamine caught his hand as he straightened. "Stay with me," she whispered, "just until I fall asleep." Knox glanced at Maria, who gave a slight nod before carrying the baby to the cradle in the corner. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, holding Jessamine's hand as her eyelids grew heavy with exhaustion. "I love you," she whispered just before sleep claimed her. "Both of you." Knox brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "And I love you, Jessamine Porter, more than I ever thought possible." In the days that followed, Jessamine and baby Thomas settled into a routine at Circle H, with Maria providing invaluable guidance and support. Knox divided his time between his duties as assistant foreman and spending every available moment with Jessamine and the infant, who had swiftly and completely captured his heart. To Jessamine's delight, Knox showed a natural aptitude with the baby, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he learned to change diapers and soothe Thomas when he was fussy. The sight of the weathered cowboy cradling the tiny infant, singing soft lullabies in his deep baritone, became a familiar and cherished image for everyone at Circle H. As spring blossomed across the valley, Knox's small house took shape on the plot of land Jim had given him. It was a simple structure, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a cozy parlor but solid and well-crafted, with large windows to let in the light and views of the mountains beyond. On a perfect April morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and birdsong filling the air, Knox invited Jessamine to ride out with him to see the nearly completed house. Maria happily volunteered to watch Thomas, now a sturdy 2-month-old with his mother's hazel eyes and a tuft of dark hair that might have come from either parent. They rode side by side through the valley, Knox occasionally pointing out features of the land or sharing plans for the future. The house stood on a gentle rise overlooking a small tributary of the main creek, surrounded by ponderosa pines that provided shade and shelter. "It's wonderful," Jessamine said sincerely as Knox helped her down from her horse. "You've done an amazing job." "It's not fancy," Knox cautioned as he led her toward the front porch, "but it's solid, should stand for generations." The interior was simple but thoughtfully designed, with built-in shelves for books, a stone fireplace in the parlor, and a kitchen with windows positioned to catch the morning light. Knox had even installed a proper bathtub in a small room off the kitchen, a luxury on a frontier ranch. "This is the master bedroom," he said, showing her a spacious room with views of the mountains. "And this," he continued, moving to a smaller room adjacent to it, "would be Thomas's room, for now at least." He gave her a meaningful look that made her heart skip a beat. "There's room to expand if the need arises." Jessamine wandered through the house, touched by the care evident in every detail. This wasn't just a structure, it was a home built with love and hope for a future Knox clearly wanted to share with her and Thomas. When they returned to the parlor, Knox seemed suddenly nervous, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "What is it, Knox?" she asked gently. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong, just—" He took a deep breath and faced her squarely. Jessamine, I built this house for you and Thomas, for us, if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a simple gold band set with a single, modest diamond that caught the light streaming through the windows. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "Can't offer you riches or a fancy life. But I can offer you this home, my protection, and my heart, for as long as I live." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me, Jessamine Porter? Will you let me be a father to Thomas and a husband to you?" Tears of joy sprang to Jessamine's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Knox Keller, yes to all of it." His face broke into that rare, transformative smile she had come to cherish as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. Knox gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When I found you in Superior, I thought I was just helping a woman in need," he said softly. "I never imagined I was finding my own future, my home. And I never imagined that the man who told me to hold my head up would be the one to give me a reason to do so for the rest of my life," Jessamine replied, her heart full to overflowing with love for this extraordinary man. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Circle H, with Jim serving as best man and Maria standing up for Jessamine. Thomas, resplendent in a christening gown Maria had sewn for the occasion, was a well-behaved participant, cradled in his mother's arms as she and Knox spoke their vows. Reverend Johnson from the Prescott Church officiated, his warm smile and inclusive words making it clear that this was a union blessed not just by law but by genuine goodwill from all present. Jim had invited the entire town, it seemed, and the celebration afterward was a joyous affair that lasted well into the evening. Among the guests was Dr. Elliot, who had delivered Thomas and become a friend to the family. He presented them with a handsome leather-bound family Bible, already inscribed with Thomas's birth details. "For you to record your growing family," he said with a meaningful smile that made Jessamine blush and Knox stand a little straighter with pride. Most touching was Jim's gift, the deed to the land where Knox had built their home, now officially transferred to both their names, along with a small herd of cattle branded with a new mark, the Circle KJ. "To get you started," Jim explained gruffly, clearly embarrassed by the emotion of the moment. "Though I expect you'll still keep your position as my assistant foreman, Knox. And you, Mrs. Keller," he added with a formal nod to Jessamine, "will continue to keep my accounts in order, I hope." "It would be my honor," Jessamine assured him, embracing the older man impulsively. "You've been like a father to us both." That night, after the guests had departed and Thomas was peacefully asleep in his cradle, Knox carried Jessamine across the threshold of their new home as tradition demanded. They stood together in the parlor, illuminated by the soft glow of the lamps Knox had lit earlier, surrounded by the gifts and well wishes of their friends and neighbors. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," Knox said softly, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "I love the sound of that," Jessamine replied, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Though I've felt at home since the moment you told me to walk beside you and hold my head up." Knox's eyes darkened with memory and emotion. "You caught my eye that day in Superior, standing so brave and alone against the town's cruelty. But it was your heart that caught mine on the journey here. And yours that taught me to trust again," Jessamine whispered, "to believe in second chances." Their kiss sealed the promise of the life they would build together, a life founded on respect, forged in adversity, and sustained by a love neither had expected to find. In the years that followed, the Circle KJ flourished, as did the family that called it home. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his mother's compassion and his adoptive father's steady nature. Knox legally adopted him when he turned 5, though in every way that mattered, he had been Thomas's father from the beginning. The family expanded with the arrival of twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, 2 years after Knox and Jessamine's wedding, followed by another son, James, named for the man who had made their happiness possible. Their home expanded as well, with Knox adding rooms as needed, always with the same care and attention to detail that had marked his original construction. Jessamine continued to manage the accounts for both the Circle 8 and their own growing ranch, her skills helping both enterprises prosper. Knox gradually took on more responsibility at Circle 8, as Jim grew older, eventually becoming the full foreman while still overseeing their own operation. They faced challenges, of course drought years that stressed the cattle, a fire that damaged part of their home, the usual trials of raising children in a frontier territory. But they faced each difficulty together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. William Barrett never reappeared in their lives. Years later, they learned through a chance encounter with a traveler from San Francisco that he had indeed married into a wealthy family there, but the marriage had not prospered. Edward Barrett had lost his mine in Superior to poor management and bad investments, ending his days as a bitter, lonely man. Jessamine felt no satisfaction at the news, only a quiet gratitude that her life had taken such a different turn. The child William had refused to acknowledge had grown into a fine young man under Knox's guidance, eventually attending college in California, a source of immense pride for both his parents. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Knox surprised Jessamine with a journey not a difficult trek like the one that had brought them together, but a comfortable train trip to San Francisco, where they stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and walked arm in arm through a city neither had ever expected to visit. "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" Knox asked as they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, the city spread before them in all its bustling prosperity. "If you had married William as planned, this might have been your life." Jessamine shook her head without hesitation. "Never. This city is beautiful to visit, but my heart is at Circle KJ with our children, our land." She squeezed his arm. "With you." Knox's smile, still rare enough to be precious even after 20 years, warmed her as it always had. "Mine too. Always has been, from the moment you took my arm in Superior and held your head up high." Together, they turned away from the view of the city and began the walk back to their hotel, side by side as they had been from the beginning, two people who had found in each other not just love, but home. The sun was setting over the Prescott Mountains as their train carried them back toward Arizona, painting the sky in the same brilliant hues that had illuminated their first evening at Circle H. Jessamine rested her head on Knox's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the greatest journey of her life had begun with a simple act of kindness from a passing cowboy who had told a frightened, shamed young woman to walk beside him and hold her head up high.